The first thing I heard wasn't the rain. It was the sound of my world grinding to a halt. 1 minute, I was delivering an online lecture on watershed dynamics, the hum of my laptop fan, a familiar drone against the steady drum of the October downpour. The next, a violent grinding shriek of metal on metal ripped through the afternoon quiet. It was a sound so brutal, so final, it made the house vibrate. My tactical flashlight, a heavy waterproof gift from an old and complicated friendship, rattled right off my desk and hit the floor with a solid thud. I muted my microphone, my lecture on soil saturation forgotten. Through the rain-streaked window of my study, I saw it. A huge yellow excavator, looking like some prehistoric beast in the gray mist, was parked on the soggy patch of lawn by the road. Its massive steel bucket was retracted, glistening with rain and something else. Fresh scrapes. And where my mailbox used to stand, a sturdy classic design my late wife and I had installed together 20 years ago, there was nothing but a mangled, twisted heap of metal, crushed into the mud like a discarded soda can. A knot of ice formed in my stomach. This wasn't an accident. Accidents don't come with an audience. Standing a few feet away, perfectly dry under a large golf umbrella, was Mr. Gable, the president of our homeowners association. He was a man who moved with the unearned confidence of a petty tyrant, all pressed slacks and a perpetual smirk. He was tapping something into a tablet, completely unfazed by the destruction. Have you ever been so angry that you just go completely calm? That was me. The heat drained from my face, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. I ended the lecture, walked to my front door, and stepped out onto the porch. The air was thick with the sickly sweet smell of diesel exhaust and damp earth. Gable saw me and gave a slow, deliberate smile. And if you've spent any time on channels like Karenology, you know exactly what kind of smile that was. It was the smile of someone who held all the cards and was about to enjoy playing them. He walked over, his expensive shoes somehow avoiding the worst of the mud. "Dr. Reed, got a moment?" he asked, his voice smooth as oil. I just stared at the wreckage. "What is this, Gable?" He followed my gaze and made a little tut-tut sound. That's a safety violation. According to the bylaws, Article 7, Section C, any structure deemed unsafe or in a state of disrepair must be removed to protect the community's aesthetic and property values. He held out the tablet for me to see. On the screen was a picture of my mailbox, now a mangled corpse. I couldn't believe the audacity. You destroyed it, and now you're calling it a violation? The board authorized emergency maintenance to clear the drainage culvert along this road. Your structure was an obstruction. Unfortunately, it sustained damage during the necessary work. He tapped the screen again, and a new document appeared. So, here's the citation. You have 24 hours to remove the debris. After that, we'll have to fine you $200 for the cleanup. He turned the tablet around so I could see the digital form, my name and address already filled in. The rain dripped from the edge of my porch roof, a slow, cold rhythm counting down my patience. He hadn't just destroyed a piece of my property. He had twisted the rules into a weapon, used it to attack me, and then had the gall to hand me the bill for the bullet. I looked from his smug face to the mangled steel that held 20 years of memories. He expected me to argue, to yell, to lose my temper. But in that moment, I knew that was the game he wanted me to play. So, I did the one thing he didn't expect. I said nothing. I just looked at him, letting the silence stretch out, letting him stand there in the rain, holding his ridiculous tablet. He finally shifted, the smile faltering for just a second. "Well, the clock's ticking, Doctor." He turned and walked back toward his immaculate sedan parked down the street, the umbrella bobbing over his head. I stayed on the porch until his car was out of sight, the cold rain starting to seep into my socks. I walked back inside, picked up my heavy-duty flashlight from the floor, and felt its cold, metallic weight in my hand. He had started a war over a mailbox. He had no idea how it was going to end. I looked at the official notice he'd emailed me, glowing on my screen. It wasn't a warning, it was an invoice for my own humiliation. The next morning, the rain had stopped, but the sky was the color of a fresh bruise. I didn't clean up the wreckage. Instead, I documented it. I'm a man of science, of methodology. I took photos from every conceivable angle, the mangled steel stark against the green, rain-soaked grass. I saved a copy of the security footage from my front door camera, which caught the whole ugly performance. the excavator, the crunch, and Gable's smug supervisory role. With the precision of a research paper, I compiled a formal complaint to the County Code Enforcement Office, detailing Gable's abuse of power and the deliberate destruction of my property. I believed in the system. I thought naively that rules were impartial. That was my first mistake. For 2 days, the only response was an automated email confirming my submission. The silence felt heavy, a tactical pause in a battle I was just beginning to understand. The metallic corpse of my mailbox sat by the road, like a monument to my own foolish optimism. Neighbors I'd known for a decade would slow their cars, stare, and then speed up, as if my bad luck was contagious. You ever feel that? Like you've been painted with a target, and everyone around you is just grateful it isn't them. Then, on the 3rd day, I got a call. It wasn't from code enforcement. It was from the county inspector's office. A man with a professionally cheerful voice informed me that an inspector would be out that afternoon to personally assess the situation regarding my complaint. A flicker of hope. Maybe someone was finally taking this seriously. His name was Mr. Davies. He arrived in a pristine white county truck and had the same polished, easygoing demeanor as the man on the phone. He was younger than me, with a firm handshake and an expression of practiced sympathy. "Dr. Reed," he said, nodding toward the destroyed mailbox. "I see the problem. Let's take a look at your complaint." I invited him in, laid out my photos on the kitchen table, and even offered to show him the video. He glanced at them for less than a minute. "Yes, I see," he said, tapping his pen on his notepad. "Mr. Gable is certainly thorough." He then walked outside, paced the area for a moment, and pulled out his own tablet. He scrolled for a bit, humming to himself. The air was cool, carrying the scent of pine needles from the woods behind my house. He finally stopped and looked at me, the sympathetic mask firmly back in place. "Well, Dr. Reed, I've reviewed the Homeowners Association's work order and cross-referenced it with county regulations." He paused for dramatic effect. "And while the damage is regrettable, the Homeowners Association was acting within its rights." I felt my jaw tighten. Within its rights to destroy private property? "They were performing necessary maintenance on a designated utility easement," he said smoothly, as if reciting from a script. "According to County Ordinance 44B, subsection 9, any structures impeding access to said easement can be removed to ensure public utility safety. The association's charter gives them the authority to act as the county's agent in these matters." It was a flood of bureaucratic nonsense, designed to drown me. "That mailbox was there for 20 years. It never impeded anything," I shot back. "It was 10 feet from the culvert they were supposedly clearing." "Frank Gable is a stickler for the letter of the law," Davies said, using Gable's first name with an unnerving familiarity. "He keeps this part of the county looking sharp. It's a tough job." He scribbled a final note on his tablet, and the sound of the digital pen clicking felt like a gavel falling. "My official finding is that the complaint is unfounded. The citation from the Homeowners Association stands. In fact, I'm issuing a secondary notice. You have 48 hours to clear the debris before the county imposes its own fine, which, I'm afraid, is considerably higher." He handed me a freshly printed paper, another official document sealing my defeat. It was a perfect vicious circle. Gable breaks the law, then uses his crony to declare his law-breaking legal. The system I had trusted wasn't just broken. It was a weapon pointed directly at me. As he walked back to his truck, Davies turned. "My advice, Doc, just clean it up. It's easier. Some fights aren't worth the trouble." The unspoken threat hung in the air long after his truck had disappeared down the street. I stood there, holding another useless piece of paper, and I knew he was wrong. The trouble had just begun. That night, the battle shifted from my front lawn to the invisible world of the internet. The official channels had failed me, so Gable decided it was time to put me on trial in the court of public opinion. He knew exactly what he was doing. People in our neighborhood, like most places, live in their own little bubbles. They see a tidy lawn, a new coat of paint, and they feel safe. Anything that disrupts that picture becomes the enemy. I found out about it when my phone started buzzing. It was a link to our neighborhood's private social media page, sent by my one remaining friendly neighbor, a quiet woman named Maria who lived 3 houses down. The post was from Gable. It started with a photo of my wrecked mailbox, taken at an unflattering angle to make it look like a pile of rusty junk that had been decaying for years. Dear neighbors, the post began, dripping with false sincerity. I know many of you have been concerned about the unsightly debris on Dr. Reed's property. He went on to paint me as an arrogant, out-of-touch academic who was refusing to follow the same rules as everyone else. He claimed I was endangering the community by not clearing the area, conveniently leaving out the part where his own crew had caused the mess. He spun a narrative where he was the selfless guardian of our property values, and I was the stubborn elitist holding the entire neighborhood hostage. The comments rolled in, one after another, a cascade of digital pitchforks. I always thought that Mailbox was an eyesore, one person wrote. Some people think the rules don't apply to them, wrote another. Someone else posted a link to a website where you could rate college professors. My name was already on there. In the span of a few hours, I had accumulated a dozen one-star reviews. Arrogant, unhelpful, talks down to students, should be fired. The words were vicious, personal, and utterly fabricated. The smell of my morning coffee turned bitter in my mouth. Have you ever been on the receiving end of a digital mob? It's a strange, disorienting feeling. These were people I'd waved to for years, people whose kids sold me Girl Scout cookies. Now, they were strangers, and I was their villain of the week. My professional reputation, something I'd spent 30 years building, was being dismantled overnight by anonymous trolls because of a petty squabble over a piece of metal. I tried to respond. I posted a calm, factual rebuttal, explaining the situation and even attaching the before picture of my well-maintained mailbox. It was like throwing a glass of water on a grease fire. My comment was either ignored or twisted. See? He just doesn't get it, someone replied. Always has to be the smartest guy in the room. The financial pressure was mounting too. The fines from the Homeowners Association and the county were now ticking up daily, a constant draining reminder of my powerlessness. But this, the attack on my livelihood, felt different. It was a lower blow. Gable wasn't just trying to win. He was trying to destroy me. He was turning my own community against me, isolating me one comment at a time. The physical space of the neighborhood felt smaller, the walls closing in. The friendly waves were gone, replaced by quick glances and hurried retreats indoors. I sat in the dark of my study, the glow of the screen illuminating the angry comments. It was a coordinated, ruthless campaign, and the worst part, it was working. I felt a cold knot of despair tighten in my chest. I had facts, I had evidence, I had the truth. But in this new kind of war, the truth didn't seem to matter at all. That's when I realized playing by the rules was a losing strategy. The rulebook had been written by my opponent. It was time to find a different game. I spent the next day in a fog of anger and frustration, cycling through scenarios in my head, each one ending in a checkmate against me. By evening, I couldn't stand the silence of my own house anymore. I needed noise, people, a place where I wasn't Dr. Reed, the neighborhood problem. I drove to a small, unassuming bar a few towns over called the Rusty Anchor. It's the kind of place that smells of stale beer and quiet desperation, where nobody knows your name and nobody cares. It was perfect. I ordered a whiskey and sat at the corner of the bar nursing it, trying to figure out my next move. The bartender, a guy in his 40s with a weary face and observant eyes, wiped down the counter near me. "Rough day?" he asked, his voice a low gravel. I just grunted in response. I wasn't in the mood for small talk. But he persisted, in that way only career bartenders can. "You look like a man trying to solve an unsolvable problem." Something about his directness broke through my defenses. Maybe it was the whiskey, or maybe I was just tired of being alone with my own thoughts. So I told him everything. The mailbox, Gable, the inspector, the online smear campaign. I expected him to nod, maybe offer a generic, "that's tough," and move on. He didn't. He stopped wiping, leaned on the counter, and looked at me intently. "Gable," he said, the name tasting like something sour in his mouth. "Frank Gable. Drives a black Lexus, right? Thinks he owns the world?" I straightened up. "You know him?" The bartender let out a short, bitter laugh. "Everybody knows him. He comes in here sometimes, brings his brother with him. The brother, a guy named Davies, runs a drainage company. All they do is brag." My heart skipped a beat. Davies. Not just the same name as the inspector, the same person. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening thud. The inspector wasn't Gable's cousin. He was his brother, and he had a drainage company. They were in here a few weeks back, the bartender continued, lowering his voice, laughing about some big fish they were about to land. A massive drainage project for one of the homeowners associations. Said it was a gold mine. All they had to do was get the board to declare an emergency. The whole scam laid itself bare in my mind. It was never about my mailbox. That was just the opening move, the manufactured crisis. Gable and his brother were creating a problem, obstructed drainage, so they could sell the expensive solution. My property was just a convenient casualty, a prop in their little play. They were planning to funnel hundreds of thousands of dollars from our community's funds directly into their own pockets. The bartender, whose name I learned was Sal, kept talking. "Listen," he said, his voice dropping even lower. "I don't know much about fighting guys like this, but I know one thing. You're messing with his money, and he'll do anything to protect it. But you're also messing with the U.S. mail." He squinted at me. "That's federal, right? People go to jail for that stuff. I heard the Postal Service has its own cops, mean ones." A new door opened in my mind, a door I hadn't even considered. All this time, I'd been fighting on Gable's turf, playing by his corrupt local rules. The homeowners association, the county inspector, they were all part of his little kingdom. But the United States Postal Service, that was a different beast entirely. It was a federal agency with its own laws, its own investigators, and a nationwide jurisdiction that Gable couldn't touch. I left Sal a $50 tip on a $10 drink. I walked out of the Rusty Anchor, not with a solution, but with a weapon. The air outside was cold and sharp, and for the first time in a week, I felt like I could breathe again. The smear campaign, the fines, the isolation, it was all designed to make me feel small and powerless. But Gable had made a critical error. In his arrogance, he hadn't just tangled with a college professor. He'd picked a fight with the federal government. He just didn't know it yet. Armed with this new knowledge, I felt a surge of confidence. I spent the weekend in a frenzy of research, digging into the municipal archives. I was looking for the original subdivision plans, the blueprints for our neighborhood's drainage system from when it was first built. It took hours, sifting through dusty digitized records, but I found it. A detailed map from 1988, showing the entire network of culverts and storm drains. And it was exactly as I suspected. The map clearly showed a primary drainage culvert running behind the properties on my side of the street, a large, crucial artery designed to handle heavy rainfall. The work Gable's crew was doing out front was purely cosmetic. Worse, by piling up dirt and debris from their clearing, they were actively blocking the smaller, secondary drains that fed into the main one. They weren't preventing flooding. They were creating the perfect conditions for it. I felt a jolt of triumph. This was it. The smoking gun. Hard, documented proof that Gable was not only manufacturing a crisis, but was actively endangering our homes to justify his brother's contract. He couldn't argue with the town's own official records. The next homeowners association meeting was scheduled for that Wednesday night. It was the big one, where the board would vote to approve the emergency drainage project, a contract worth $500,000 of our money. I arrived early, my hands clutching a folder with a dozen copies of the 1988 drainage map. The room was packed. Gable had done his job well. The crowd was already hostile, muttering and glaring in my direction. When the floor opened for public comment, I walked to the podium. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me. "My name is Arthur Reed," I began, my voice steady. "And I'm here to talk about water, but not the water Mr. Gable is worried about." I laid out my case methodically. I presented the original plans, explaining how the system was designed to work. I showed them photographs of the blocked secondary drains. I connected the dots, the manufactured emergency, the conflict of interest with his brother's company, the impending disaster he was engineering. For a moment, I had them. You could feel the mood in the room shift. People were looking at each other, whispering. The anger directed at me was turning into suspicion aimed at the board. I had him. I had him cornered with undeniable facts. Then Gable stood up. He wasn't flustered. He wasn't angry. He was smiling. That same cold, confident smile from the day he destroyed my mailbox. "Thank you, Dr. Reed," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Always appreciate a history lesson. It's good you brought up those old plans, because it gives me the opportunity to share the new ones." He signaled to his brother, Davies, who was sitting in the front row. Davies walked up and handed him a thick, freshly printed blueprint. Gable unrolled it on the table with a flourish. As part of our due diligence, Gable announced, the board commissioned an updated hydrological survey. As you can see from this plan, approved and certified by a licensed county inspector just last week, the old system is obsolete. The main flow has been redirected. The work we are proposing is not only necessary, it's critical. My blood ran cold. The licensed county inspector was his brother. The document was a complete fabrication, a piece of legal fiction they had created to overwrite reality. But it looked official. It had stamps, signatures, a seal. To everyone else in this room, it was gospel. My decades-old map looked like what he called it, a history lesson, useless, obsolete. Gable turned to the crowd. Dr. Reed has brought old, irrelevant data to try and derail a project vital to protecting our homes. The question you have to ask is, why? He let the question hang in the air. The whispers started again, but now they were aimed back at me. I was no longer the brave whistleblower. I was the crazy conspiracy theorist, the nuisance, the man wasting everyone's time with ancient history. The board voted. The project was approved unanimously. A ripple of applause went through the room. I stood there, clutching my useless maps, feeling the weight of a total, public defeat. I had walked into a gunfight with a history book, and I'd been shot down. Gable had not only beaten me, he had used my own strategy against me and turned me into a fool in front of my entire community. As people filed out, us patting Gable on the back, I saw him look at me over the crowd. He lifted his chin in a tiny, triumphant nod. Checkmate. I drove home that night in a state of cold, quiet rage. The sting of public humiliation was sharp, but underneath it, something else was hardening. My faith in systems, in rules, in documents, it was gone, burned away in the fluorescent lighting of that community hall. Gable had shown me the game, and now I knew. You don't win by proving you're right. You win by changing the rules. I sat in my study, the house dark except for the single lamp on my desk. The silence was absolute. My eyes fell on the heavy tactical flashlight Sal the bartender had reminded me of. A gift from my old partner, back when we tried to launch a tech startup. We'd designed sensors for monitoring water quality in remote locations. The venture failed, a painful chapter I rarely revisited. But the skills I'd learned, they were still there. And so was some of the old equipment packed away in my garage. I thought about the drainage system, not the paper version on Gable's fraudulent map, but the real physical network of pipes and culverts under our feet. I thought about the water. How do you prove a theory in hydrology? You don't use paper, you use a tracer. An idea, reckless and brilliant, began to form in my mind. What if I could make the water itself testify? What if I could conduct a live, undeniable experiment for the whole neighborhood to see? The next morning, I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't file another complaint. I made a different call. "Hello," I said, my voice calm and steady. "I'd like to report the willful destruction of a federally protected mail receptacle and the deliberate obstruction of mail delivery. I was speaking to the United States Postal Inspection Service." The woman on the other end of the line listened patiently, her voice devoid of emotion. I gave her the facts, just the facts. The date, the time, Gable's name, the excavator. I sent her the security footage. She didn't make any promises, but she gave me a case number and said an inspector would be in touch. It was a single seed planted in a field far from Gable's control. Then I went to work on the main event. I spent 2 days planning. I dug out my old equipment from the garage, pH sensors, flow meters, and a case of highly concentrated, non-toxic, biodegradable fluorescent dye, the kind used for environmental tracing. This stuff was potent. A single gallon could turn an entire creek a shocking, impossible shade of green. I needed allies. I went to Maria, the quiet neighbor who had sent me the link. I laid out the whole plan. I told her about Gable's scam, the fake map, and my idea for a live demonstration. I saw the fear in her eyes, but I also saw a spark of anger. Her property was downhill from mine. She had more to lose than anyone. She was in. Through her, we got 2 more neighbors on board, both retired engineers who understood the stakes and despised Gable's tyranny. The weather forecast was my final accomplice. A major storm system was predicted to hit on Saturday afternoon. The same day Gable had scheduled a groundbreaking ceremony for his fraudulent drainage project. He'd invited the mayor, local press, the whole 9 yards. It was meant to be his victory lap. He had no idea it was going to be the stage for his downfall. The night before the storm, under the cover of darkness, my small team moved like ghosts. We used my original 1988 map, the history lesson, as our guide. We popped the manhole covers for the storm drains at the highest points in the neighborhood, far upstream from my house. Into each one, we poured a container of the fluorescent green dye. We were loading the gun. The rain would pull the trigger. I went to bed that night feeling a nervous energy I hadn't felt in years. It was the thrill of the unknown, the feeling of standing on the edge of a cliff, about to jump. This was no longer about a mailbox. It was about truth. And I was about to make the truth so bright, so vivid, that no one could ignore it. Saturday afternoon arrived, and with it, the storm. The sky turned a bruised purple-gray, and a low, menacing thunder rumbled in the distance. It was the perfect overture. Down the street, a large white tent had been set up for Gable's groundbreaking ceremony. I could see the local news van parked nearby, a small crowd of neighbors huddled under umbrellas. It was showtime. As the first thick drops of rain began to fall, I walked to the end of my driveway. I wasn't hiding. I wanted a front row seat. The rain intensified, quickly turning from a sprinkle to a downpour, drumming a frantic rhythm on the pavement. The gutters began to overflow. Water started sheeting across the roads. Through the deluge, I could see Gable at the podium, his voice muffled by the storm as he spoke into the microphone, probably congratulating himself. The mayor stood beside him, holding a ceremonial golden shovel. They were all smiling, oblivious. And then it happened. It started as a trickle, then a stream. From the storm drain at the top of the hill, a ribbon of shockingly bright, electric green water emerged. It flowed down the street, a lurid, unnatural river carving its path through the gray afternoon. It followed the exact path I had predicted, the path laid out on my obsolete 1988 map. It bypassed the block's secondary drains, gained volume, and surged directly toward the ceremony tent. A murmur went through the crowd. Phones came out, dozens of them, all pointed at the advancing green tide. The news camera swiveled away from the podium. Gable stopped talking, his smile frozen on his face. The green water, a liquid highlighter marking his fraud, pooled around the legs of the tent, swirling around the polished shoes of the mayor. I had a megaphone in my hand. I raised it to my lips. My voice, amplified, cut through the roar of the rain. "Mr. Gable didn't want you to see the real drainage system," I yelled. "So I decided to show you. This is where the water is supposed to go. This is the system he is destroying to justify a $500,000 contract for his brother." The crowd was silent, their faces a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. The proof wasn't on paper. It was flowing at their feet, undeniable and brilliantly green. I had turned the entire neighborhood into a live hydrological model. Gable stood there, drenched and speechless, his scam exposed in the most public and humiliating way possible. Just then, two figures in plain clothes emerged from an unmarked sedan that had pulled up quietly behind the news van. They walked with a calm, deliberate purpose directly toward Gable. One of them flipped open a badge. "Mr. Gable, we're with the U.S. Postal Inspection Service," the man said, his voice cutting cleanly through the chaos. "We have a few questions for you about the destruction of federal property." The color drained from Gable's face. He looked from the postal inspectors to the green water lapping at his ankles, to me standing there with the megaphone. It was over. All of it. The insurance underwriter for the project, who was present, was already on his phone, likely canceling the policy that made the contract possible. In the end, Gable and his brother were charged with mail fraud, conspiracy, and a host of other state-level crimes. The Homeowners Association was forced into receivership. The city had to fund an actual, legitimate repair of the drainage system, using my original maps as the guide. The university quietly removed the fake reviews, and my rating returned to normal. A few months later, a standard-issue metal mailbox was installed at the end of my driveway by a postal service employee. A few days after that, a letter arrived. It was a check from the USPIS Restitution Fund. The amount? $58.50. The exact value of a standard mailbox. I looked at the check, then at the sturdy, unadorned box standing proudly by the road, and I let out a laugh. It wasn't about the money. It was never about the mailbox. It was about the simple, satisfying fact that sometimes, even in a world that feels rigged, you can find a way to make the truth shine through. And if this story resonated with you, let me know in the comments. I read everyone.